Good morning. Happy spring? I think it snowed yesterday. It's raining today, but it is supposed to be above freezing, yes? Well, believe it or not, that is actually what we'll be spending our morning together this morning talking about, learning about, reflecting on the realities of spring as it is. My name is Reverend Greta Seidohl, and I use she, her pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as your assistant minister. And it is good to be with you this morning. Thank you for being here. Wherever you come from, wherever you join us from this morning, whether here in our seats or joining us virtually from your own couches or beds or dining room tables, whomever you love, whomever you are loved by, whatever the color of your skin, whatever your creed or no creed at all, you are welcome here. And it is good to have you here. Thank you for choosing to be with us this morning. I want to draw our attention to a few brief things as we get rolling. First of all, it is spring break, whether or not it feels like it outside. And so there is no children and youth programming today. So if you are under high school age and we're wondering why nothing is happening in the social hall, that's why. You're invited to join us for the entirety of service, and we welcome your presence here with us. There is nursery available for the littlest ones. I also want to extend gratitude to our musicians today, to Margie Peterson, Claire Schweitzer, and Leanne King, who are here as part of the week-long Bach Festival happening in Grand Rapids at large, so we get a little taste of that here at Fountain Street Church. Also, with gratitude to Reverend Christopher Rowe, our acting senior minister and co-pilot in service today. And most importantly, once again, gratitude for all of you. That's why we're here. We're here to be together with each and every one of you. So thank you for choosing to spend your time with us this morning, or this evening, or tomorrow, whenever you happen to tune in to the YouTube channel. I invite you to take a deep breath with me as we settle into worship and prepare for the call to worship.
As we prepare for this time together, I want to invite each of you into this space of worship through our call to worship, which comes to us from Reverend Evan Carville Ziemer. Hear these words as your invitation this morning into a time of deeper meaning, intention, and growth for all of us. If we lived in another climate, our souls might speak other languages. We might speak oasis, or permafrost, or dry season, or monsoon. But our souls speak spring. Our souls speak green shoots pushing through last year's leaves. Our souls speak flower buds stretching to the sun. Our souls speak mud puddle and nest building, damp earth and worm casings, tiny green leaves, and frog choruses. We speak spring because spring sings in us. We gather to nurture our faith in our own growing, our own courage to push through, our own blossoming into beauty, our own small part in the springing of our world. So come, let us worship together. Our first reading this morning on the theme of Let Spring Be comes to us from Compost Happens by Laura Grace Weldon. Nature teaches that nothing is lost. It's transmuted, spread between rows of beans, last year's rusty leaves tamp down weeds. Coffee grounds and banana peels foster rose blooms. Breadcrumbs scattered for birds become song. Leftovers offered to chickens come back as eggs, yolks sunrise orange. Broccoli stems and bruised apples fed to cows return as milk steaming in the pail, as patties steaming in the pasture. Surely our shame and sorrow also return, composted by years into something generative as wisdom.
At my side, when I cook most often, is my almost 3-year-old child. She has this little helper tower that gets her to about counter height. And the other day, I was cutting up sweet potatoes into little tiny cubes when one of them went flying across the kitchen and down onto the ground and sort of under the dishwasher, therefore being contaminated by large amounts of dog and cat hair because I had not so recently swept the floor. When I picked it up and went to rinse it off, my toddler exclaimed, "No, Mama, that's food for the wormies." She said it so full of glee and delight that I could barely get out of my mouth that it could just be washed off and then used again just fine. Disappointment totally washed across her face. This actually happens often. Something about the way that we explained the process of composting has made this toddler deeply invested in making sure that the worms are well fed and tended to. Anytime a piece of food hits the floor, it is immediately worm food. And not with disappointment, but with delight. Every time it happens, it makes me wonder and pause, trying to imagine what it would be like if we all cared with such zealous joy for our scraps, for the moldy cucumber that got lost in the back of the fridge, for the worms and bugs and crawly things that take what we don't want. Because you see, compost is a curious thing. Much like our reading asked us earlier to recognize, there's a bit of chicken and egg situation going on between our food and our compost. Healthy soil, fertile soil capable of growing nutrient-dense food for our consumption requires the dead and discarded, rotten remains of plants and animals alike. Which came first, the fruits or the fertile soil? The answer to that matters less than this truth, that they coexist with each other. That is the first lesson of spring for me. Make space and time for compost. Make space and time for the crawlers and the flyers who make the compost. For without them, our hands will toil needlessly in barren soil. Jamie Zimmer-Jones, a horticulturist local to Grand Rapids, recently shared a sign that she created on Facebook. It read, If you love them, let them sleep. This year's pollinators are still sleeping. Waiting to tidy up your garden is much appreciated by the tiny creatures who rule the world. Nature knows best. I asked her to expound a little bit more on what she meant, and this is what she said. We get so eager this time of year to see the colorful, dramatic blooms. We so look forward to summer. But when we look more closely and seek to understand, there's so much happening right now. So much determinedly pushing through the layers of decomposing fall leaves that we can just appreciate when we allow what is to just be. We can allow ourselves then to be amazed and in awe of what nature provides. It can be oh so tempting, my friends, that on that first sunny day we break out rakes and garden tools, but nature asks us to be patient. Nature asks us to let her do her work beneath the surface and with little gratitude. To let the worms wiggle once more as the bugs awake from their slumber, to let the decay fostered by the frost of winter seep into the heart of the earth. To understand that if there is no compost, there is no soil. Transmuting waste into wisdom, as our reading named. Or more accurately, transmuting what we have been taught to label as waste into what it truly is, wisdom. And so, my friends, I think spring's first challenge to us is, what is the compost in our lives? What have we been discarding instead of repurposing? What have we been labeling as waste that is waiting to be transmuted into wisdom? Grief? Loss? Regret? Disappointment? Anger? Fear? Doubt? Oh, I didn't ask for that tragedy. Throw it in with the eggshells. Oh, I do not want to think about that regret anymore. Toss it out with those forgotten leftovers. Oh, we don't have time to process those emotions. I got better things to do. Why even bother composting in the first place? But what wisdom we miss when we mislabel our experiences as waste. Let this lesson from spring leap from the garden and into our hearts. Let us learn from spring to not discard the weight and the waste of winter too eagerly. Let it linger. Let us linger. Let the nutrients from every bit of the last year, every bit we would rather discard, be transmuted with the slowly unfolding new season. Let spring be spring. second reading and lesson for spring is an excerpt from Thich Nhat Hanh. It is possible, of course, to get stuck in the mud of life. It's easy enough to notice mud all over you at times. The hardest thing to practice is not allowing yourself to be overwhelmed by despair. When you're overwhelmed by despair, all you can see is suffering everywhere you look. You feel as if the worst thing is happening to you. But we must remember that suffering is a kind of mud that we need in order to generate joy and happiness. Without suffering, there's no happiness. So we shouldn't discriminate against mud. We have to learn how to embrace and cradle our suffering and the suffering of the world with a lot of tenderness.
How do we show up to suffering? How do we show up to suffering? All of the suffering that exists in our world, both internally and externally. A couple months ago, we examined the very real presence of spiritual bypassing in our culture, and it seemed to be a universally understood reality among all of us. That there's this emotional and psychological and spiritual desire to just bypass the discomfort of all of the things that might be right before us. When the going gets tough or things get too messy in the mud, we might wish to just bypass it all together for an easier way out, or at least a less muddy, or at least a more clean way out. But we also know that that's an inauthentic way of being fully alive. And so this is a phenomenon and a pattern that even Thich Nhat Hanh wrote about quite extensively in his own work for peacemaking and living a balanced and happy life. In his missive, No Mud, No Lotus, he looked at this extensively, and he described that there is this phenomenon where we see mud as this icky, nasty thing we want to avoid. But this is counter to Buddhism, his own practice, and also counter to all of the great religious traditions. And so he illuminates this understanding of dukkha. This idea that there must be a codependence and interdependence of both suffering and happiness, or loss and joy, or any number of uncomfortable things to live a comfortable, more balanced life. Hanh says that you cannot separate suffering from happiness or loss from joy. And to that extent, the more you seek happiness, the more you seek joy, the more you desire peace, the more it should be understood that you are going to encounter greater unhappiness and greater discomfort. And that's because these things live in tandem with one another. In the Jewish and Christian stories, I like to think of the people of Israel who are escaping the oppression of Egypt, pursuing a greater life of freedom, happiness, peace, harmony. And in that pursuit, if you remember your Old Testament history, if you recall, they complained a lot and they encountered a lot of unhappiness and a lot of discomfort because the road that they were on was not just a road away from suffering. It was a road to self-discovery in which they realized that suffering was always with them and within them. And so dukkha, as Hanh says, is really an invitation to show up to our suffering and the suffering of the world around us. Dukkha is also the instigation for us to truly practice showing up to the messiness of life, especially in those liminal places, in those uncomfortable middle places that we find ourselves. It's an invitation to truly face these things head on so that we can actually engage them for transformation. And DACA is the inspiration to truly embrace the mud of life and understand it as a way to coexist with our suffering rather than avoiding it. In the Christian study of liberation theology, there's a saying that goes like this: you can't get to Easter without going through Good Friday first. You can't get to Easter without going through Good Friday first. And to that extent, you can't get to Good Friday without going through Lent first. DACA. You can't just jump to the resurrection and the relief, the trumpets and the fanfare and the lilies and the joy without the messiness and the pain and the sorrow of Good Friday, complete with all of the heart that it brings with him. Now, towards the end of his book, No Mud, No Lotus, Thich Nhat Hanh suggests that if it's happiness and peace that you are truly seeking, then you first must accept that those things are going to have to be intertwined and wrapped up in the hard parts of your life too. And so step one is as simple as this: we must open ourselves to that transformation. We've got to move through the desert with the people of Israel. We've got to move through the Good Friday narrative if we want to truly feel resurrected and reborn on Easter. Which reminds me of one more maxim from liberation theology that I want to leave you with. It is often said that the only way to it is through it. The only way to it is through it, and that is a tenet in liberation theology. Quite literally, there are moments on the literal and spiritual path where there is a lot of mud and mess and sorrow and loss in front of us. And a lot of times we want to turn around and go back the other way or kind of walk on that awkward part of the trail around it as best we can just to avoid the mud. But the only way to encounter true happiness and peacemaking and harmony is through it. And that matters because all of the world's religious traditions, all of them, teach that this kind of way of being is regenerative. And that means that balancing our inner peace will help balance the world's outer peace. And we all knew that the world needs that so much. So, in our effort to let spring be, let the mud and the lotus be your invitation this morning towards a richer way of being human. Resist the urge to run around the mud or choose a different path or even rush home and try to wash yourself off. And instead, even if only for a moment, show up to your suffering. And show up to the suffering of the world around you, messiness and all. You just might find a lotus that's waiting for you. So let the mud be. Let the mess be. Let the discomfort be. And let's let spring be. Our third reading this morning on the theme of Let Spring Be comes to us in the prose Maple by Reverend Eileen Casey Campbell. Running over the unplowed paths of the city park, My child demands his father read the placards that name each winter bear tree. Young ginkgos and ancient oaks, magnolias with buds nearly peaking, horse chestnuts, buckeyes, dogwoods. No one need read the next one. Maple, I call out from far behind. It's rare I pass a sugar maple without a whisper of thanks. And suddenly, I'm just as small as the child is now, trudging through slushy, lingering snow. Behind my silent father in the east woods, a late winter sun has just peeked over the hills, and we glide through the quiet forest. Such a deep quiet that sometimes when we quiet ourselves, still our feet, hold tight to the clanging tin buckets, slow our breath, then hold it for a moment. I am certain that we can hear the very sap rising. To the same woods, these same trees, to inflict our tiny wounds on them again and again, to whisper thanks and to beg forgiveness. And I return each year, and I return again to those moments of morning quietude in the dark winter woods where I can hear nothing but my whispers into the trees and their slow sap whispers in returning, promising no grudges, only sweetness.
During my childhood and adolescence, my sadness that winter was over was only lessened by my anticipation that sugaring season had arrived. For those unfamiliar, sugaring season is the time when maple trees are tapped for their sweet sap, which is then carefully tended by fire to boil and bubble till all the water evaporates and all that remains is a brown, amber, liquid gold. Sugaring is not for the faint of heart or body. I remember my grandfather looking maples up and down, running his hand along the trunk, taking in the branches, the tree's health, the tree's willingness to be tapped, reading the bark for where would yield the most or the best, and discovering where to hammer the tap and carefully hang a bucket. If I watched closely, I could watch his fingers move across previous year's taps, carefully plugged with handmade little maple plugs to heal, as best he could, the scars he left behind. And then we would sit quietly and watch for the first few drops of sap to creep slowly out and down. Drip, drip, drip. Then the next morning we would ride out to empty those buckets into a larger boiler, this large metal tub that sat in my grandfather's backyard with several compartments, but most importantly, what was underneath was a fire that had to remain tended at a careful and steady temperature for the whole season, weeks. And this could often be a dance with Mother Nature, if not a fight with Mother Nature. You see, because the best sugaring seasons are also the most wild. The times that your bucket is the most full or overflowing are the times when the days are warm and sunny and gloriously like summer, and the nights are frigid, freezing, and remind you of a January winter. That up and down, that back and forth causes the sap to flow with ease and grace out into the buckets, giving the gift of maple more and more, and it also causes your fire to die and need tending more and more. Less tending during the day when perhaps we are awake and well caffeinated, and more tending at night when we are cold and would rather be huddled beneath blankets. My grandfather loved making maple syrup. And yet, I think that some mornings, after a cold night with too many trips outside to revive that fire, were his crankiest. But it was in this quiet persistence and patience that my grandfather and spring were matched for each other, and that they passed on this wisdom to all who were willing to learn. Because that's the other thing about sugaring season, it is best not done alone. There are too many buckets and too many fires to tend by oneself, and so it requires the gift of community. Reflecting on the gift of the sugar maples in early spring and the process of sugaring itself felt so relevant as we come towards the close of Lent. Lent, like sugar time, is but a season. But the most meaningful seasons are not linear or straightforward. Whether it's wandering in the desert or the fluctuations in the weather, we can merely endure the season with hunched shoulders and held breath, waiting for it to pass. Or we can tend the fires of our own grief, give fuel and room to breathe in equal measure. We can tap into the well of hope that comes only with reflection and connection, and avoid the desire to bypass the hard work that would deny us the sweetness of authenticity on the other side. Those are the gifts and lessons of the sugaring season, I believe. In her essay, Maple Sugar Moon, ecologist, indigenous writer, and poet Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, "One half of the truth is that the earth endows us with great gifts. The other half is that the gift is not enough. The responsibility does not lie with the maples alone. The other half belongs to us. We participate in the transformation. It is our work and our gratitude that distills the sweetness. Our own griefs, our own regrets and laments will not heal themselves, my friends. Instead, they are distilled by the fire of time, with a watchful eye and a kind heart to the evolution and becoming of what is possible within. And so, beloveds, please, I beg of you, do not rush to summer and miss the lessons of spring. Let spring be sweaty on our brows from making our own heat in the search of transformation. Let spring be sticky on our fingers from tenderly touching the trunks of trees, seeking gently their wisdom. Let spring be sweet with the reward of patience and persistence. Let spring be spring.
if I say to you, you have nowhere to be but here right now, I wonder if you know what that signals. I suspect you do, because for a month or so now I've noticed when I say it, I watch a few of you start to adjust already and get comfortable. Spring is quite literally an invitation and a song that says that as well. You have nowhere else to be but here right now. I admitted to you a few weeks ago that I struggle in spring because it feels like one day it's going to be one way and the next it's the other. A couple weeks ago it was 67 and last night it was snowing. And I confess to you my own struggle with this. As we walked in, Reverend Greta Joe can attest, I saw some daffodils starting to come up, but they were droopy. And I immediately jumped to, oh my gosh, are all the daffodils going to be dead this year? It's silly, but it's a hard season. But if we can let spring be and teach us that everything will come in its time, I believe there was an ancient figure who said, let tomorrow worry about itself, then I think we can also practice being in the one place we need to be right now. And so we're going to pray. In a moment, we will have a prayer that is offered to us by the Reverend Kathy Ryan Starr. But before we go into that space, I invite you to get comfortable. Let your body affirm that this is the only place you need to be. Let the noise and the chaos and the uncertainty of the world beyond these walls disappear for a moment. If you're with us in this cathedral of love, let this seat hold you. And if you're watching from anywhere else, let your place and space hold you too. Feel the intimacy and the interconnectedness of the world around you wrap you in love. Spirit of spring and new life, spirit of death and decay, this morning we turn to your wisdom and strength as we seek to live lives of meaning and love. We know that the cycle of life is powerful. We know that everything that lives dies. We know that everything that dies has once lived. And we know that there is no escaping this cycle, so what can we learn from its ancient power? The leaves that we put away in the fall or will put away in the coming months are now compost, fertilizing the soil as we prepare to till the garden for this year's blessings. That harbinger of spring, the crocus, brings such delight and lasts but for just a moment, and then it's gone. But it makes way for the abundance of green and color that spring will bring. But we also know that with that beauty comes loss. And when one who was once beloved dies, we cry and we mourn and we lament. And we carry them in our hearts, seeking to live as they inspired us to live. As a child grows, we also marvel at their unfolding that happens before us, and so too, we carry that gift after someone we love passes. These are the seasons of life that we know we are called into. Seasons to seek love. Seasons to appreciate beauty. Seasons to sing and to dance. Seasons to seek solace and healing. And so now, in the company of the many, help us to honor these seasons in a moment of silence. May each of us and all of us be open to the vulnerability and the power and the transformation of spring. May it be so. Amen.
In a moment, our ushers will come forward with the offertory plates. We have a wonderful tradition in this institution where half of the offertory plate leaves these walls and goes back out into our larger community. And so I invite you this morning to treat the offering as an act of spring, as an act of planting seeds that you cannot yet see sprout and maybe will not even yourself see the blossoms. But that does not mean they are not worth planting. That does not mean that they are not worth fertile soil in which to grow. So I invite you to give and to give generously with our gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to spend your morning with us. Thank you for taking spring back with you into the world. Before we close our time here this morning, we have a few announcements, enough that Christopher and I are going to tag team them to make them a little bit more interesting. The first is I want to take a moment to explain, again, in a new way, the artwork hanging before you. You might have seen it up over the past couple of weeks. This is an art creation spearheaded by the communications committee of the board with some other wonderful lay leaders that came out of the listening circle process that this congregation, that the board led this congregation through a few months ago. These strips you can find in the narthex, in the lobby. They're kind of all over. And the invitation is right in line with Lent and spring and all the rest of it. To name your burden, to name your loss, to name your grief. And then when you've written on them in whatever way feels good to you, to return them and to watch these chains grow. These are all of the strips that have already come in, and I know that more have already come in this morning. And I want to invite you to appreciate that despite the fact that we are naming griefs and losses and regrets and burdens, there is beauty in this creation. And there is beauty in their coming together and letting them be named, letting them be held and felt and real and recognized by our shared community. So if you haven't filled out a strip yet, or if you have, but you're feeling called to do another, there's no limit. You can do more than one. If you're wondering, well, that's not for me, I want to invite you to just take a strip home. Take a strip home, put it on your table, put it on your fridge, keep it in your purse. I promise it'll come to you. And I invite you to be vulnerable and real enough with this community to bring it back, filled out. and see what becomes in this unfolding. Thank you.
I wanted to warmly invite everybody back into this beautiful space at 1 p.m. today. We will be honoring and celebrating the life of Dick Harris, who was a longtime member. His wife Joanne still is a member, though you probably haven't seen her since before COVID, and she's also living up in Rockford now. So at 1 p.m. we will gather in this space that Dick and Joanne loved so dearly and honor his life and comfort his family. He was a long time, well, not long time, he was on the governing board, and he was also an usher, and they were involved in many ways. So if you're able to, please join me as we celebrate Dick's life and comfort his family.
On a totally different note, Alt Prom is back. All area high schoolers are invited to join for a safe and supportive night for LGBTQ youth, allies, and their friends. This Alt Prom Spring Fling 2022 will take place on April 16th from 7 to 8 p.m. here at Fountain Street Church in our social hall. Registration is required as well as masks, and students will need to have a student ID. If you are homeschooled or know a youth that particular requirement might be a difficulty for, or you just want more information or to learn more about how to support this, I invite you to reach out to our Director of Children and Youth Programming, Lydia Stubbs. You can find her email in our Friday Flash or on our website. And I hope that we will see a lot of area youth there. Thank you.
There is a goods and service auction that is officially live now. This is an important arm of our fundraising efforts here at Fountain Street Church, and it's a place where people can either give goods donated that they would like to auction off to raise money, or services, which could be quite literally a service like, I'll do some landscaping for you, or it could be an event like, I'll have you to my home for dinner or a party, or any number of things. The great news is that they are still accepting donations through April 10th. So if you want to think up some creative way that you could support this effort, you've still got a little over a week. That's good news for me too, because I'm still trying to come up with an idea. And then it will end on April 17th. So that is Easter. So if you're feeling really inspired after our Sunday of singing and whatnot, you can rush home and get in those last minute bids before 1:15 when it ends. So please check out the goods and services auction. You can find out more information in the Friday Flash, or there is a special tab on the website right now. So give a look at that and see how you might support the church in a fun and meaningful way.
Another opportunity to connect with your spiritual neighbors, other members of Fountain Street Church, but also your physical neighbors out in the wider Grand Rapids is through our Community Corners program. Community Corners hosts monthly, hopefully. We took a break because of the COVID surges. Events to get together with your physical neighbors out in the wider Grand Rapids beyond these four walls. So please save the date for April 24th at 12 p.m. There will be more details coming, but each Community Corner, southeast, northeast, southwest, southeast, will be meeting at a park to take in some nature, go for a little stroll together, and just get to know each other outside of this space. So please mark your calendars and plan to join us on April 24th at 12 p.m.
You probably got communication from the church this week about some changing protocols and guidelines for COVID-19, and that included that beginning on Easter Sunday, we are going to reintroduce congregational singing back into our services. And we are also going to be allowing the use of other spaces in our building. And so that begins immediately. And so if you have questions about that or thoughts on how you might want to use the building, please direct them to one of our staff members who will be happy to work with you. And we look forward to singing together once we get to the Easter weekend. And again, I tried to make it clear, but if not, please come to me or Reverend Greta Joe or a board member even if you have concerns or thoughts that are lingering about these decisions traditions, but I think it's an exciting moment for us to really kind of continue to practice what it looks like to be community in these shifting times. And speaking of Easter, my final announcement is about Holy Week, which I don't even know if we use that vernacular exactly here at Fountain Street, but beginning on Palm Sunday, which is a week from today, we are going to have some interesting festivities. We're going to have the cantor from Temple at Emmanuel, my friend and colleague David Fair, will be with us, and he's going to be speaking on, we're going to try to do a hybrid of Passover and Palm Sunday together, his idea, and it should be wonderful. We'll have wonderful music that day. David will be speaking and singing. Then on Good Friday, we're going to gather here in the sanctuary at 7 p.m., which will actually be the first time we sing together. And we're going to practice going through the mud a little bit. We're going to practice going through Good Friday to get to Easter Sunday. And we'll tell you more about that as we get closer, but mark your calendars for that at 7 p.m. And finally, once again, we will be singing on Easter, April 17th. You can also continue to watch it from home if that's a safer option for you or your family, and we look forward to this new season of being church and worshiping together.
Okay, my last one, I promise. Who's here from our Together West Michigan team? I see Meredith. And I see Kathleen. Awesome. Okay, so you've probably heard me talk about this over the last couple weeks. Together West Michigan is a broad-based organizing effort here in Grand Rapids and beyond that Fountain Street is proud to be a part of. And Together West Michigan and us, therefore, are in the midst of a house meeting campaign. You've heard me talk about that. I want to take one more second to say that these are a one-off occurrence. If you choose to attend a house meeting, it is an hour-long commitment from you to show up and share your story and hear about what Together West Michigan is doing, and then go on your merry way, or choose to get more involved as you feel so called. So what I want to offer is that over the next couple of weeks between now and Easter, each week after Sunday service, members of our Together West Michigan team will be down here up front to answer your questions about Together West Michigan, to answer your questions about house meetings, to help you host a house meeting if you're willing to host with your neighbors, with your friends, with your committee, with your job. We're trying to listen to as many members of our larger Grand Rapids community as we can, or if enough of you show up front here after service, our team members are ready and willing to do a house meeting right after service with you. So I encourage you to come forward and talk to Meredith, talk to Kathleen, or whoever's up here next week and the following to learn more about this important effort of listening, learning, and acting with our wider community. Thank you. All right. Deep breath. Our blessing, our benediction today is one that I invite us to do communally, because we act as a community, both here and beyond. And so these blessings are not just from me to you, they are from and for us all, so that we might live into the best part of ourselves and what we wish for our community today and always. So as I read, I invite you to respond, led by Reverend Christopher, with what was maybe a predictable response: let spring be, right? Can you practice that for me? I talk, then you say,
let spring be.
All right. One more deep breath. When the snow melts and we ache for green rather than the brown that lies beneath, may we remember that wisdom transmutes in each fallen leaf, and
let spring be.
When it feels as if life is full of waste and leftovers we'd rather forget, may we remember that there are nutrients in the deep soil of our turmoils, and
let spring be.
When the blooms of summer seem like they will never come, may we know that mud is not a hindrance, but its source, and
Let spring be.
When we feel stuck in the muck and the mire of life, may we gift ourselves with the tenderness worthy of a lotus. And
Let spring be.
when the push and the pull between winter and summer feels fraught, may we remember that it is a dance with its own rhythm. And
Let spring be.
when grief flows through us again like sap in a tree, may we tend the fires of connection so that we might find the sweetness of community. And
Let spring be.
may we let spring be. Blessed be, beloveds. Happy spring.